Lovely, thank you. Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I think we're all touched by care and caring for loved ones, and we thought it was an important subject to cover and an important aspect of vulnerability, really, which is what we're all about. And just for those of you that don't know, that haven't sort of joined us on anything before, I'm Helen Lord. I'm the CEO of the Vulnerability Registration Service. The Vulnerability Registration Service was set up about 8 years ago. Our sole purpose really is to highlight to service providers where people are in vulnerable circumstances, whether that be financial or non-financial. And our belief is very much that there should be one route and as easy as possible for individuals to alert service providers to that fact and allow service providers to act upon that and give the right support and help and the right customer journey for those individuals. I'd like to very much thank the speakers that are joining us this morning. I've heard them all speak before. They are people that it's clear what their passion is about this subject. They're insightful, they know what they're talking about, and they want to make a difference, which is really, really refreshing. So we have got, after you've had me talking at you, we've got Rachel from Policy and Practice, who I find fascinating when I hear her speak. Lynn, who has her own experiences, which she will share with you. We will cut off the recording at that point. And then Johnny Timpson, who I'm not sure if Johnny, oh, there's Johnny, I can see him now. If you've ever seen anything that Johnny puts across on LinkedIn, his campaigning, his passion against it, again, is excellent. We've also got Jane Eckford joined us. Jane has a wealth of experience. She, I'm glad to say, is a member of our advisory board as well. And I'll ask Jane to sort of chip in when I've finished speaking. So unpaid carers, it is a little bit topical, probably more topical than when we started to create the carers flag. It is Carers Week next week, so we felt it was fairly timely to actually talk about this today. And we were saying before, just before we started, it is clearly not very high on the political agenda. We are not seeing it hugely mentioned in campaigning. Those who are actually mentioning it are probably not the ones that are going to have to be accountable and find the money to pay for anything, which is probably why the others aren't talking about it very much. I've seen some stuff from the Lib Dems around it. They did a session the other day talking about it. It was touched upon on Question Time last night for anyone who saw it. But it is not high on the agenda. I suppose where it has been more topical recently is listening to people like Kate Garraway speaking, who has obviously cared for her husband who she lost and has made it very clear her circumstances, despite her high profile, her job, she has ended up being in debt. So we've introduced an unpaid carer flag. And we wanted to do that to really start to give a voice to those people, those many, many people who are acting as unpaid carers, who are probably vulnerable themselves as a result of being an unpaid carer, and to give them some acknowledgement and to enable them to alert service providers when they're dealing with them that they have difficult and vulnerable circumstances as well. So we have a range of flags through the Vulnerability Registration Service to give organisations a heads up about their customer circumstances and enable them to act appropriately. So it's really very much about that voice, and that flag that we've introduced is now available. So I am an unpaid carer, which is why I feel so strongly and passionately about this, and wanted to give a voice to the many unpaid carers out there. So I care for my 92-year-old mother, and to be honest, it's probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, just by merit of the relentlessness of it, the exhaustion associated with it. I used to think that having two small children and a full-time job and getting up at stupid o'clock and managing everything that went with them and having sleepless nights was hard. This is much harder. You don't have babysitters, you don't have nurseries to put somebody into, you don't have that support mechanism that may be out there when you have small children. And also, you're pretty sure what path that is going to take in terms of children. They should grow up and everything should be alleviated. I find it extremely, extremely hard. Having said that, I cannot comprehend what some people are going through. I cannot comprehend the circumstances and the situation somebody who is managing caring for an ill child is in. I can't. And I have nothing but admiration for those people who look after loved ones who have mental health issues, dementia, Alzheimer's. I've seen that pretty much firsthand with my own father and my mother, give her due, looked after him, and it is a much harder, more difficult scenario. So in some respects, I think I have it easy. I have a good relationship with my mother, always have done. I don't have that doing it out of duty. I care, it's done out of love, but it's still very difficult. And while I'm sitting here at the moment, my heart is in my mouth because she's lost her mobility over the last week. And I'm sitting here with my husband on high alert to make sure that she's okay and she doesn't stumble. And that is the reality. It's 24/7. So that's my situation and really why I feel so strongly about it. You'll see throughout this presentation, I've put some quotes in, which I won't read out, but where they're taken from. I joined a Facebook forum or a Facebook group recently, just for my own personal reasons, really. Caring is a very solitary thing. It's very isolating, I think. And you think nobody understands how I feel. So I joined a group which is called the Carents Lounge, which is all around allowing people to express their circumstances when, and in this scenario, they're caring usually for elderly parents, sometimes partners. But I think some of these quotes that I've pulled out just sort of show what's going through people's minds. They are not difficult to find. I just spent a few minutes yesterday finding them. It is awash with these feelings and these emotions, and I think it shows how people are trying to cope and what they are actually coping with. So the stats, really, I know Rachel will touch on these, and I know Johnny will undoubtedly touch on these. I don't think you can overstate them. They'll give their own angles and their own insight, I'm sure, around this. But when we're talking about unpaid carers, we're talking, according to the 2021 census, 5 million unpaid carers in the UK. According to Carers UK, it's probably about 10.7 million. And I don't think that's unrealistic. But you're talking about a sixth of the population doing care, unpaid care in some form or another. So that's how many people's lives it touches. And when we talk about, and I've had lots of conversations about the semantics of the word vulnerability and it's whether it's the right word to use. I think the reality of it is, if you're an unpaid carer, you are going to find yourself in a vulnerable circumstance. There's 10.7 million of them probably out there. But the other very, very key thing, and I think when we're talking about political agendas and why this should be on it, those unpaid carers are saving the UK economy about 162 billion pounds. That's 445 million pounds each day. So it doesn't take a lot to realise that we really need to be focusing on this and making sure those people are supported. But 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 carers, 16% of us are carers in debt. 2 in 5, 40% of those claiming carers allowance are in debt. Those people that are claiming carers allowance will be the ones that are finding it impossible to have an income from elsewhere, to have earning potential, that their ability to have a career has probably diminished. And not surprisingly, those caring for over 5 years are the most likely to be in debt. 600 people a day are leaving work to care for somebody. And unpaid carers, again, possibly not surprisingly, are the ones that are more likely to live in deprived areas of the UK, and that's again according to the 2021 census. So if I just move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about carers allowance. And this is what carers allowance, this is the help that's available out there. Carers allowance, if you're caring for somebody that's able to claim carers allowance, if you're looking after somebody who claims attendance allowance and you're caring for over 35 hours a week, you can get £81.90 a week. That disappears if you are earning over £151 a week. I heard a government minister not too long ago, I think it was the one before last, who was responsible for this, saying, well, it's not meant to be a salary. Well, it's certainly not, clearly not meant to be a salary, but actually earning a salary if you are a carer is nigh on impossible. At the same time, £13 million worth of unclaimed carers allowance, there or thereabouts, depending on what figures you look at, is still going unclaimed. Claims for carers allowance can be backdated by 3 months, but actually it takes most people around 2 years to actually realise that they're a carer, because again, there isn't a voice to it, there isn't the awareness around it. I have about five female cousins. I think every single one of them has been a carer at some stage. I have about 5 best friends that I've had for most of my life. I think 4 of those have been a carer at one time. None of those, apart from one, I think, would ever have thought of claiming carers allowance in their life, but they are caring now, caring for parents. Next slide, please, Heidi. So we move on to the thorny issue, and I think Johnny will have more to say about this than perhaps I do. Carers allowance, you'll have seen recently, and this is where this has hit the press lately, is unpaid carers are again, I will say, saving the UK economy £162 billion. Unclaimed carers allowance is high, that figure is wrong, just ignore it. But the DWP are reclaiming 150 million in carers allowance overpayments. And you'll have seen the stuff on that. 56% of those overpayments are actually less than £1,000. I think what incensed me most about the reclaiming of overpayments of carers allowance was actually the fact that if somebody wishes to dispute it in any way, they are encouraged to actually write and explain the reasons why they wish to dispute this. You are talking about stressed people. You are talking about people who are probably in debt, because I'm absolutely certain that if they're not in debt, they probably haven't got the time or energy to be writing to government departments and have protracted and lengthy correspondence with a government department to reclaim less than £1,000. So you're immediately putting that stress on those individuals because they may have had some small overpayment in a very small amount of carers allowance that they are able to claim. And I think moving on, this is where we are able to help unpaid carers. This is what we need to do. We need to make life more easy for them. We cannot take the stress away. We cannot take the emotion away of needing to care for a loved one, but we can smooth the path a little bit. Now, the demographics around unpaid carers, and some of these figures are taken from our own stats, our own database, are very clear. 10.3% of women are unpaid carers, 7.8% of men are unpaid carers. That's according to the census. And I probably would say all of this because I very much fall firmly into this demographic, but I see a huge amount of women who are carers. They probably don't consider themselves to be, and they're probably not actually on that census. The most likely age of an unpaid carer is 59. So you're talking, as I say, I fall very, very firmly into this demographic. Women in their 50s doing a huge amount of unpaid care. They are more likely to struggle with their mental health. They are more likely to struggle with loneliness and isolation. And I think we're not talking about women here. We're not talking about the women of yesteryear here who were perhaps housewives, brought up their children. We are talking about women who are have probably been either the main breadwinner, or they have made a significant difference to the earnings and the income of a household. And very often they are having to cut that back or give that up to up completely. And if they're not having to give it up, they are having to adapt the way that they conduct their professional life in significant ways, and adapt and manage accordingly. So next slide, please, Heidi. So the challenges of being an unpaid carer, and again, this is a quote from somebody on that Carers lounge, and another thing about that, there is quite a significant amount of help on their website there if anybody wanted to look, and it's a good resource for people in this situation to actually go to. But the challenges of being an unpaid carer, I see them as pretty much threefold, and I think they are all interlinked. They're inextricably connected to each other. One is in relation to time. Carers are significantly time poor. One is financial. Their ability to earn has been diminished. The benefits that are available to them are small. They are restrained. Their freedom, I think, is the main thing that is very much taken away from them, because the priorities are dictated to them. And the impact of all of that on physical and mental health can be significant, and that is why people become vulnerable. So if we move on to talk a little bit about financial well-being, I mean, I've seen many comments, and I've been involved in many meetings where this has cropped up. And again, going back to some of the quotes that I've seen from people on the Carers Lounge, if people are seeking help, if people are asking for support, there is a little bit of a default position where they feel, whether it's perception or not, that they are actually trying to pull a fast one. And that tends to be what people feel that is the default position. If they're asking for support, they're asking for financial help. If they are registering people on the priority service register with energy companies, the default position is a little bit like they are trying to pull a fast one. So I think we have to be cognizant of that when we're speaking and dealing with people in this situation. So financial well-being is impacted. People are liable to fall into debt and find no way out of it. Their ability to earn has either been removed or is very limited. Looking after somebody carries a cost with it. There's no doubt about it. Help is at a premium if you're actually looking to get it. Benefits are insufficient. There is a complete unpredictable nature around caring for somebody. You cannot predict what's going to happen the next week. You cannot predict what's going to happen over the next month or the next year. So how can you plan financially? How can you sort of recover your circumstances if you just simply don't know what's going to happen? People are emotionally overwhelmed. They are looking for help. They feel helpless. They're restricted from a time perspective. Having conversations with service providers, if they are lengthy and they are difficult, it's almost a luxury. They need to be minimised as much as possible. Dealing with administration, dealing with lengthy form filling, remembering that you're also asking people to act on somebody else's behalf, which multiplies the difficulty tenfold. It is hard, so easing the way is really important. And carers themselves are always at the bottom of the priority list. They're at the bottom of the pile, sorting out their own finances, seeking out the best deals, paying their own bills, whatever it may be, because they are putting somebody else above themselves all the time. Their own financial well-being is always bottom of the list. And in terms of mental and physical well-being, so on the next slide, Heidi, caring for a loved one obviously comes with worry and emotional trauma, and that, as I say, can be pretty relentless. It is 24/7. You're not handing somebody over to somebody else to take the responsibility away. it is down to you, and it is down to you all the time. And that comes with a huge amount of pressure. Life becomes an organizational nightmare. Your freedom is taken away. Everything you do is calculated around managing that other person. We were talking at the beginning, I went to on holiday 4 weeks ago. I don't have many holidays. My holiday involved me basically a military operation of getting 6 other people, my brother, my sister-in-law, my children, their partners, all to step in and look after my mother. And even then, there is a constant high alert in your mind that, are they doing it right? Are they doing what I do? How are they doing what I have asked them to? Finding respite is a massive challenge. Firstly, there's the guilt. Do you want to hand your loved one over to another person? Or you're trying to do all the right things all the time. If you look at, how do I make my situation better? Well, you need to eat healthily, you need to take exercise, you need to take time for yourself. All of those things are a massive challenge. It is no surprise then that people do fall off the wagon. There's many temptations out there. It's far easier perhaps to pour yourself a glass of wine than go for a quick run, because you are actually exhausted and trying to do that. You've got a constant sense of guilt, you've got resentment, you've got frustration. However much you love someone, looking after them is hard and it can be challenging. You're also responsible for not only somebody's well-being, you're also responsible for their quality of life. You're also responsible for somebody else's happiness. You're worried you're not getting it right all the time. You're feeling guilty because it has an impact on your children. It has an impact on your partner. It can have an impact on your employers or your work life. So you're feeling guilty about that, as well as feeling guilty for perhaps not getting it right. That will have an impact on self-worth. You're not perhaps achieving the things that you want to do in a career. You're not getting thanks. You're not getting acknowledgement for what you're doing. 60% of unpaid carers suffer from long-term health issues. The sense of loneliness, isolation, and helplessness is absolutely incredible, because you are on your own. You are the one that is ultimately the one that is actually responsible. And then moving on to the last slide, the other factor of it is that people are time poor. It's not just doubling your time being responsible for somebody else, it's increasing it more than that. You are doing things like worrying about somebody else's doctor's appointments. You're worrying about their financial affairs, administration, housekeeping, all those things. It is harder when you're doing it for somebody else and you're second guessing somebody else's needs all the time. You acting on somebody else's behalf in financial affairs is a minefield. Hopefully you have something like a legal power of attorney in place. Even then, it is very difficult. Will people accept it? Will they want you to put in complete another form? Will you have to send your legal power of attorney to every single organisation that the individual is dealing with? And that is part of what we do at VRS, actually. We will accept people's registration on somebody else's behalf if they have a legal power of attorney, hopefully enabling them to act on somebody else's behalf. So against all that sort of negativity, I would say, what can we really do to help? We can't change people's circumstances. We can't make everything better for them. But I think what we do need to do is we need to be realistic and really face the raw truth about people in vulnerable situations and not gloss over it. I see a huge amount around achieving the right outcomes. And I've spent sort of 30 odd years dealing in financial services. I'm struggling to get my head around what achieving the right outcome for somebody is. There is real challenge about identifying what the right outcome for somebody is. It suggests to me that we want to put lots of nice corporate ticks in boxes and do lots of glossing over things. Okay, we can do that if somebody has accessibility issues, if English isn't a first language, if there's dyslexia, we can do it to a certain amount in terms of somebody in debt. But the reality is that people don't necessarily know what is going to happen tomorrow. They don't know what is going to be their challenge tomorrow. So how can an organisation dictate create a framework that says this is the right outcome for this individual, or the individual themselves probably can't identify what the right outcome is. They need support, they need help, they need adaptability, they need understanding. And that is why it's important to alert organisations to the fact that people are in this situation. They need that absolute acknowledgement. So I totally understand why we have a sort of FCA framework that is looking and focusing on outcomes, because that's something tangible. But the reality of care, of vulnerability, is it's a changeable thing. It's a human state. We cannot put hard and fast rules around it. So I think what we can do when we identify that somebody is an unpaid carer is to minimise call transfers, minimise unnecessary paperwork, give streamlined and effective customer service. So having that flag, having that awareness enables us to do that. Give them signposting and advice where appropriate, passport them to the right places, have flexibility in corporate procedures, understand the whole unpredictability of the situation. Do people need payment holidays? Can we adapt the communication channels that we offer to them? Are we offering them the appropriate product and service offers? Can we identify cost savings and discounts for those individuals? Are there adaptable payment plans? Are there payment holidays? And we need to understand where somebody else is acting on somebody else's behalf, because at the moment it is an absolute nightmare to actually do so. So if we're aware of somebody's vulnerability, then there are things that we can do about it. We can't sort of tick some box and make everything all right. We're not there. We're not social workers. We're not trying to make life right, but we can ease the process of supporting somebody when they are an unpaid carer. And the same principle actually relates to all forms of vulnerability. Sorry, I managed to mute myself. Just lastly, before I move on. So one of the things that we are sort of very, very focused on is leading people to as much support as is possible. Individuals are able to register with us, and organisations are currently able to access our services. So what we have actually done with that is we are moving forward with that and trying to give people links and accessibility and the level of support that they need when they are in a vulnerable situation. And that may be the individual, or it might be giving clients access to enable them to better manage the individual when they are able to identify and determine their vulnerability. So we have support portals which are under development. Part of that, and one of the things that we're currently implementing at the moment, is so that individuals have access to the National Support Network, which gives them a wealth of access to advice, support, whatever their circumstances. That's applicable both to customer service support staff in clients that work with us. It's also applicable to individuals if they are seeking additional support as well. And we are also looking to enable people to have easy access to identify where they are eligible for benefits, where they are eligible for support. We are already doing that a little bit in some work we do with an organisation called Healthy Home Solutions, where we've contacted a lot of individuals and helped lead them to support, whether that be in relation to things like dementia, debt advice, whether they should be recorded on the priority service register with their energy providers, if they are struggling because of scams, whether they are struggling in terms of having accessibility to broadband. The list goes on. What we are trying to do is ensure that individuals have access to a portal where they have support in one place, rather than having to go seeking that in hundreds and hundreds of different places. So we have those portals. they are under development. They are getting more and more intuitive as we move forward. So I think that's another really important thing. We have to have a one-stop shop for vulnerable individuals, and that's what we see ourselves as being. So that is it from me. That's a final quote from somebody, which I think perhaps sums up the challenges of being an unpaid carer, essentially. If anybody's got any questions for me, perhaps ask at the end, but I'd just like to hand over, if I may, sorry, before we get to we move forward, if I could just hand over to Jane, if I may. Jane, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? And I think you know, I would echo a lot of what you said about your own personal experience, Helen, because I've been a carer. I largely gave up my career to look after my mum, who passed away in February. Whilst mentally, I felt that I was completely a logical, practical, sensible person with experience of local government. I'm a charity trustee. I have you also influence the customer contact industry. You know that all these organizations are trying to work to hold data on vulnerable people because they want to support people, but the system is totally broken. So as you give up your work, you become invisible, you lose your income, you sacrifice your own health in large measure because you're prioritizing somebody else, whose agency you are supporting, whose privacy you are supporting, who you become intimately involved with. You know, I was quite close to my mum, but I didn't expect to be so close to the issues that she faced as her Parkinson's declined. Very, very capable woman, very private. So you become the total linchpin within a fragmented ecosystem of health, social care, finances, just the decision making, even as her power of attorney, because she was compos mentis but could not move. And I was her named carer. It didn't actually give me many more powers to actually help her. I still had to explain what I was doing. I still had to feel that I was justifying my role with some agencies, not with others. I also found it a very dispiriting that different people, perhaps across the family, have different ideas of what care should be. So, whilst you might be dealing with things at a sort of strategic level, looking at the bigger plan, preparing for a deteriorating illness, making sure she had choices, other people would criticize you for not sitting with her having cups of tea 24 hours a day, which she would have hated and did hate. So it's a very complex thing and it becomes very personal. And because it becomes personal, it's quite difficult to say, look, the system needs to be changed. We need to provide the same level of investment into care to free people to contribute to the economy, to recognise the support unpaid carers are already giving to the economy, and allowing them to plan for their own lives whilst they're caring and for a future beyond their job of care. I'm now at the other end, and I have to think, well, you know, where can I make myself most useful? And actually, I'm so exhausted. I need a long rest first, so that's not particularly good for the other people I support. So yes, it's an odd situation. It's deeply personal, quite emotional, but also there's some very compelling strategic arguments for really sorting out how we help unpaid carers across the country. I think that's my assessment of that. And thank you, Helen, for your detailed description of some of the challenges there.
Thanks. Thank you, Jane. Okay, Rachel, can we pass over to you? Rachel, I mean, Rachel inspires me with her passion and her take on this. All our speakers today are very passionate about this, and I think that's absolutely what it takes to make a difference. And I'm always very conscious that organizations like ourselves, organizations like Policy and Practice, there is no competitiveness around what we're doing, or there shouldn't be. This is a hard, huge nut to crack, and we need to sort of collaborate and work together as much as possible, especially as I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of government focus on it in the near future. So I'm afraid it all sort of falls to us. So Rachel, if I can pass over to you, please.
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I've just Heidi's going to drive my slides as well, but I've just realised I might be getting to the point where I'm catfishing with this LinkedIn profile picture. I think I might have to to update it. I am Rachel Walker. I'm Policy and Research Director. Research policy doesn't matter. Policy and Practice. Heidi, if you want to go to my first slide, I can. Okay, for those of you who aren't aware, about who Policy and Practice are. As Helen was just saying, there is more than enough poverty to go around, and we're absolutely all part of what I would consider to be a policy community, and a sort of a campaigning community. And it's when we come together as a policy community that we really make the difference. So here at Policy and Practice, we are a private company working in a space in which not a lot of private companies do work. But what we do is a few things, and it's not if it's in purple on the map, Policy and Practice is either in a local authority or assistance advice. So you can see the range and coverage of the issues that we deal with on a week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. So we do a few things, and we conduct research into poverty and social outcomes using data. So we're looking at the moment, and part of what I do in particular is we look at the things, the links between poverty and social outcomes. So we're looking at things like if you're on universal credit and living below the poverty line or relative poverty, your children are twice as likely to be referred to children's social care and twice as likely to get an intervention when they get there. We look at things like the interaction between poverty and universal credit and A&E attendance. If you're living in poverty, and as Helen has been saying, this applies absolutely to carers, you're more likely to attend A&E. We're working on, and this very much builds on what Helen's just been saying, we're working with Citizens Advice nationally in England and Wales on a national framework of social tariffs with the aim of influencing a new government, although the general election announcement has messed with my project timelines, but here we are. So we're looking to try and introduce a network, a framework, a national solid framework of social tariffs. Social tariffs being things like electricity, gas, warm homes discounts, etc., TV licenses even, that you can get when claiming benefits. But the system is very fragmented, and we want people to be able to, exactly like Helen was just saying, I'm so pleased you just said it, Helen, we want people to have one route, one way to claim, and this is what we're working on. We also look at things like how poverty metrics work and how income volatility works, etc. This is touching the sides of what we do. Now, we're quite well known for what we call the Missing Out series. So Missing Out 2024 is about unclaimed benefits, and we find 23 billion in unclaimed support every year. Now, this is across the spectrum of the welfare state, from universal credit to carers allowance. And we look at things like the impact of changes to welfare policy. So when we talk about unclaimed benefits, and when we talk about the policy community coming together, what I think I call it a bit of a policy pylon. Now, I said this the other day to somebody and they thought I meant like an electricity pylon. What I actually meant was like WWE wrestlers, when they all pile on top of each other. And the policy community coming together to really pile on to one or two niche topics seems to be working. So when we look at things like local housing allowance that was unfrozen for the first time in 4 years recently, this was something that the policy community really came together with one voice to start talking about. And it's happening now with carers allowance. So as I'm going to talk about, and as Helen's already touched on, carers allowance is gaining absolutely rightly a lot of traction in the media at the moment. Now, I would argue that's negative and positive, but I will touch on that in a couple of minutes. But what we're doing at Policy in Practice, just again, very briefly, is we have software. So we're not just researching problems and sort of, you know, talking about it. Like we're very much like the Vulnerability Registration Service. We want to do something about it. So we've built software platforms that local authorities use, that charities use, that housing associations use. And we put data into one place, whereas data was previously in lots of different places. So the DWP have some, the HMRC have some, local authorities have some. We pull it all into one place. And we use that data to identify people who are missing out on benefits that they ought to be claiming. That's what Policy in Practice does. I'm not here to talk about what we do. I'm here to talk about carers allowance. Heidi, I love the best Professor Sir Chris Whittier. Next slide, please. Thank you. Helen's already touched on some of this, but I'm going to build on what Helen has talked about. So we have, and as Helen already mentioned this morning, there's a few different figures knocking about in terms of unclaimed carers allowance. Now, in the Missing Out 2024 report, carers allowance, and I did the vast majority of the analysis for this report, carers allowance was the trickiest, worst benefit to calculate. I ended up going back to an academic methodology from 2010 and replicating what they'd done in this study in terms of using DWP stats, census stats, a few other things. And the figure we got to was £2.3 billion a year. Now, it doesn't matter to me whether it's 13 million or 13 billion. The fact is carers are not claiming the exact amounts that they ought to be. And the system is pretty much working against carers when it comes to claiming. So the figures here that you will see are exactly what Helen's been talking about. But my next slide builds on the pitfalls of what this means. But I want to focus just on the bottom two lines here. So as Helen was saying, 162 billion a year is what we're saying, what the economy is saving through unpaid care. Now, £81.90 a week over 35 hours a week is £2.34 an hour. Now, my first job was at McDonald's. I was 16 years, well, my first proper job, not cash in hand job, was at McDonald's, and I earned £2.70 an hour. And that was nearly 25 years ago. And we're still valuing unpaid care in terms of carers allowance at £2.34 an hour. It's utterly unacceptable, particularly when the already particularly low living wage is £11.44 an hour for people over the age of 21. So when we look at the system as it exists, carers allowance is absolutely, and I make no qualms about it, it's the stingiest of all of the benefits. It really is quite adding insult to injury in some cases. Next slide, please, Helen. Heidi, sorry. Thank you. So this is where we're going to build on what we've been talking about in terms of carers allowance. Now, carers allowance, and I don't want to get too technical about it because, believe me, technical is the word for carers allowance. But there are some pitfalls. So not only is carers allowance an extremely stingy benefit where we've got to work over 35 hours a week in unpaid care and have less than £151 a week in earnings from elsewhere, plus lots of other benefits and lots of other criteria. But this is what happens when you claim carers allowance. Severe disability premiums in universal credit worth £81.50 a week stop. So when someone claims carers allowance, if that severe disability premium is being claimed in universal credit, it is withdrawn, it is netted off, it is compensated for. So not only are we saying we're going to give you a very small amount, we're going to take that small amount from elsewhere as well. You know, don't get too giddy. We're not going to just be giving you money for doing this wonderful job. We're going to take some away. The severe disability premium in pension credit for the cared for person stops. And that's again worth £81.50 a week. So it's about 40 pence difference, but you know, we're splitting hairs here. We're taking with one hand, giving with one hand and absolutely taking away with the other. Carers allowance is deducted or netted off against UC when the carer claims UC at exactly the same amount. So £81.90 a week is taken from universal credit. Carers allowance is not increased if you care for more than one person. Quite a few people, I mean, we know lots and lots of people care for more than one parents, elderly parents, an absolute classic example. You do not get twice the carers allowance for caring for more than one person. Absolutely not. Why would you? And for anybody who's claiming carers allowance and they earn a penny over £151 a week, all of that carer's allowance becomes unpayable or ineligible. And this is where, at the moment, carers are absolutely falling through the cracks of the system. So, as Helen was just saying, we've got some of the news reports that we've seen recently paint a picture that has had me utterly frustrated, and I choose to be frustrated and not depressed about these things, because that's when we take action. The next slide, please, Heidi. Thank you. Now, who claims? So again, building on what Helen's just been talking about. So Helen was talking about national figures in terms of how many people as part of the national population are carers. These figures here look at the people who claim carers allowance. Now, carers allowance is older than me. Not many things are these days, but it's older than me. Now, the DWP go right back in terms of their statistics on carers allowance, and it's actually one of the richer data sets that they have available. So I did a bit of digging, and carers allowance on here, it is absolutely, you don't need a degree in statistics to see what this chart is telling you. Women by absolutely outstrip men, and this is a gender binary, and this is absolutely the way the DWP records things, but women claim nearly 80% of carers allowance, and going right back to 2003, which is when this chart starts, nothing has changed. So over the last 20 years, the gender split of people claiming carers allowance has not budged one bit. We know that women are making up the majority of carers. We know that there is a gender benefit gap in particular, that 73% currently in 2024, 73% of carers allowance claimants identify as women. As Helen was saying earlier as well, we know that some carers live in more regionally deprived areas, and that plays out in the DWP statistics as well. So 30% live in the north of England. That's the northwest and the northeast combined. You can tell from my accent, that's my neck of the woods. And we have lots of different social factors that contribute to this. So we have lower wages, we have poorer access to public services. We know we have a sicker population in areas like the north and the southwest, for example. We know that the burden of responsibility falls to these communities, but we can see in the statistics. So when we see 30% of people don't live in the north, but 30% of people claiming carers allowance live in the north. Around 29% live in London and the south. And when I say the south, I've had to chunk this up pretty bluntly. It's the south, the southeast and the southwest, London, southeast and southwest. But again, another 30%. Now, if we know how many people, the population proportions here are way out. So then when we look at the north and we see these regionally deprived areas absolutely falling into further deprivation because of the system, it plays out in these statistics. 42, again, over the age of 50. But if we want to go to the next slide, Heidi. Thank you. Because again, I want to build on what Helen was talking about in terms of age. So I've taken, these are the DWP statistics, and these are the most recent statistics that are available on carers allowance. And they go, it's November 2023 is the most recent statistics that they've released. Unpaid care absolutely increases with age. Not a shock to anybody who's, we know we have the squeezed middle generation, we have people, women, absolute, oh, sorry, yeah, thank you. So there is a clear entitlement here. Now, what I want to do is have a look at this graph in terms of underlying entitlement. Now, when somebody claims carers allowance, we've already touched on the ludicrous situation of the very stringent restrictions, the pitfalls of claiming carers allowance, the very low amounts of carers allowance. But because some people do not actually qualify for a payment, they retain what they call underlying entitlement. Now, underlying entitlement, it does, again, doesn't take a statistics genius to look at this, shoots up when we look at pension age. People 65 and over, now this is because underlying entitlement and entitlement to carers allowance clashes with the state pension. I was talking earlier this week at the AGM for the Pensions Policy Institute. Now, the clues in the title there, these people absolutely know exactly what they're talking about with pensions, and nobody in that room realised that carers allowance is offset against the state pension. So when somebody over the stage of state pension or somebody in receipt of the state pension claims carer's allowance, it can affect their state pension. You can only claim carer's allowance up to the limit of a state pension. Let's, for ease of maths, pretend your state pension is £100. No, let's say it's £50. £50, I have to be under £50 a week. You can only claim up to £81.90 in pension and carer's allowance. So you would only get 31.90. Gosh, my maths, a Friday morning, we know the maths isn't mathing today, but 31.90 in terms of carer's allowance. So we absolutely, everywhere you look, carers are hitting different barriers in terms of their finances. And this system is absolutely unforgiving. So when we look at charts like this, first of all, we absolutely see the demographics in what we know to exist. We can see that women are by and large absolutely outstripping men in terms of claiming carer's allowance. We know that the gendered division of labour historically, and it appears not to be changing, certainly not in terms of carer's allowance anytime soon. But we know that there is a gendered division of labour when it comes to unpaid care, and the statistics tell us about that. We can see very clearly in the statistics that there is an age dimension here to being able to care. And there's a comment in the chat at the moment. Absolutely. Women who are looking after their own children and then looking after elderly parents or grandparents. I have done it myself. My grandfather's no longer with us. We had a team of carers. I developed a spreadsheet. That's how complex it got at one point. You know, we had a spreadsheet, a WhatsApp group, and you know, a Saturday afternoon drinks because we were all exhausted at the end of the week for caring for one person. And that was a team of 4 of us. I had 2 very young children at the time, and my role was cooking, and delivering his meals every day. Didn't do all of the rest of the stuff. My sister did, my dad did, there's a few other people. But the burden of being able to have to look after young children and an elderly relative at the same time cannot be underestimated. But I certainly didn't fall into one of these categories at that time. Now, for those 65 and over, we can see that there is a massive drop in terms of people being able to claim carer's allowance. Yet we know that these are the people who are doing a massive amount of the caring. The system is broke. Absolutely. Passion, not anger. So Heidi, next slide, please. Again, building on what Helen's been talking about, I wanted to talk about a little bit more about this £250 million in overpayments. And I want to talk about it in terms of how other benefits are treated within the system, and carer's allowance has fallen again through the cracks, absolutely devaluing care. So £250 million in overpayments from around 134,000 people claiming carer's allowance who have unwittingly earned over £151 a week at any point, and their carer's allowance then becomes ineligible. Now, universal credit, if somebody claims universal credit and they are in employment, the system currently copes with fluctuating earnings on a monthly basis. So if your earnings go up and down, the system very much from HMRC to the DWP to lots of other organisations and to your universal credit payment adjusts. You don't hear me complimenting universal credit or nor the DWP very often, but I will say that in these circumstances, overpayments of universal credit have absolutely been prevented through smart use of technology. Why does this not happen for carers? Now, the reason this doesn't happen for carers is because carers and carers allowance is a very old benefit, and the DWP builds systems, and these systems go down a path, and when you get to reform or you get to absolute benefit newness, it's very difficult to claw these systems back and to integrate systems, and nor do we want to put all our systems in one basket yet. We have a system here at the moment where carers, some of our most vulnerable people in the country, and as Helen has absolutely described this morning, the lived reality of being a carer means that you're not keeping an eye on your weekly salary. If you're able to work at all, the system does not keep an eye on your weekly salary. The system does not do what it does for people who are claiming other in-work benefits. Now, So real-time earnings is what we call it. The National Audit Office have committed to an investigation into this. The DWP are exploring text message alerts for earnings. So not quite the same situation whereby they can adjust in real time someone's benefits based on their earnings, but they're now considering a text message alert to tell somebody if their earnings may or may not have gone over the threshold. It's not good enough. First of all, the threshold's not good enough. The amounts that we're paying carers is not good enough. The systems that are in place for carers at the moment is not good enough. And the proposed solutions, in my opinion, are not good enough. We need a situation, and if whichever government comes in next, we absolutely want to be able to do something about carers. And if Labour are committing to doing it, happy days. What we need is fundamental reform when it comes to carers allowance. There is no other way to approach this. Now, that's all a bit doom and gloom. What can we do about it? So we're using at Policy and Practice. I want to talk about one small campaign that we've done recently in the last 2 to 3 months. It's a very small campaign with a local authority in Bedfordshire. Now, using data through universal credit and through different disability and administrative data that we have access to through our clients and the software that we provide, we were able to identify, as a pilot project, 11 unpaid carers who were not claiming their entitlements for lots of different things. It's not just carers allowance, but we were able to identify 11 unpaid carers. 3 of them were living in temporary accommodation. Now, you know, just to really add insult to injury, we had unpaid carers providing the care for people themselves living in such a dire situation that they were in temporary accommodation. They were themselves without a home. But we were able to move all three of them out of temporary accommodation. Now, saving the council around £16,000 a year. It's a lot of money, and that's per person in temporary accommodation, where we're currently spending 1.7 billion a year in temporary accommodation. I could talk about that all day, but we're not here to talk about that. But we moved, this is the plight of what we're talking about. They were in temporary accommodation. We were able to increase their income after costs, so their disposable income, we were able to increase it by close to £200 a week. We were able to get them an additional nearly £60 a week in benefits. We brought 10 of those households out of a cash shortfall. Now, Citizens Advice will tell you at least half of the people that are approaching them at the moment are what they would call living on empty or in a cash shortfall. There is nothing we can do. You can maximise benefits, you can maximise income, you can squeeze the state for everything that it has, but some people, regardless, will still be living in a cash shortfall. And for one of these households, that was still the case. We are still working with them, but we were able to lift them out of cash shortfall. Now, all 11 were able to be lifted out of relative poverty. I think it tells you a lot about poverty metrics, that people can still be in a cash shortfall and still technically out of relative poverty. But again, the system itself isn't perhaps coordinating as much as it could do. But we were able to reduce debt for this cohort of people by £6,300 altogether. We know that carers are absolutely undervalued. They are underclaiming. We know that the system is complex. Now, I said earlier around some of the challenges around the news stories that we're seeing at the moment. The policy pylon that I think is happening is absolutely welcome. But when in the media we focus only on the negatives of claiming state welfare support, a lot of the problems are in the language, because we focus only on the pitfalls, we focus on the fear of claiming, we focus on fraud. The DWP actually bunches fraud and error together into one category, which baffles me, but here we are. So when we talk about error and when we talk about clawing back £250 million, there was a recent case of a man in Leyland, I think, which is up in my neck of the woods, and he ended up with an electronic tag on his ankle for 12 months because of overpaid carers allowance that the DWP eventually admitted was a mistake at their end. This is what people are reading about when they talk about carers allowance. What they're not reading about is the state is actually here to support you in this very limited and needs reform situation, but the state is actually here to do something for you. What they're reading is, get it wrong and we will restrict your liberty in some way. Now, we know through our work around unclaimed benefits in general that why people don't claim is it falls into lots and lots of individual categories. But stigma and fear and shame are some of the biggest drivers for not claiming benefits. Fear of falling foul of the system is enormous. We're seeing it at the moment with things like universal credit managed migration. So a lot of carers are also claiming universal credit because we know this is, you know, an out of work benefit as well as an in-work benefit. And people are migrating from legacy benefits over to universal credit, and they're dropping out at a rate of around 25 to 30%. And initial findings and what we're seeing in the policy community is that fear of falling foul of the DWP and of the system in general is driving some of this, the people dropping out of benefits. We don't want to see this with carers allowance. And what I would absolutely love to see over the next policy period, now that's fluctuating with the election, is the policy community coming together to combat some of the fears around these things, to really address what we can do for carers allowance. Because these things sit like a bad restaurant review. We all remember a bad restaurant review much better than we spread around where you've had a good meal somewhere. But a bad restaurant review will stick with a restaurant for years and years. A bad story around carers allowance will stick with someone an awful lot more than, oh, actually, I was able to claim £81.90 a week and it genuinely helped. That's not the case with carers allowance. We focus very much on the negatives. And my concern is that fear is going to drive even fewer people going to carers allowance. We know that fear is moving people away from universal credit. We know that stigma and shame already has such an enormous impact on being able to claim benefits at all. Here at Policy in Practice, we are absolutely working on this. We are supporting what Helen and her team are doing in terms of flagging the status of an unpaid carer. We're working to analyse and raise awareness around carers allowance. We're working to lobby the new government and existing ministers and governments on the use of data so that we can support people who are caring. As Helen was saying earlier, it's not acceptable really that people have to go to multiple different agencies, and even signposting sometimes is exhausting. Signpost me all you want. I am exhausted from doing 50 to 60 to 70 hours worth of care. I do not have the mental or physical energy as a carer to do this. We want to change that. We want to use data to put flags like we're talking about in the vulnerability registration service, like information that we have from universal credit, like we do with the pension service and other things. We want to be able to share this data. So one of the biggest asks that Policy in Practice will be coming up for approaching a new government with is around that data sharing. We can ease the burden, the administrative burden, the complexity, and take away some of the fear and stigma by sharing data and using it proactively. I've probably raced through my slides a little faster than I do because I do tend to completely ignore my brief and ignore all questions and just go off on one in terms of benefits. But I'd absolutely love to answer any questions or open up a discussion if we have a little bit of time, but also happy to contribute at the end.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. I love listening to you. I just find what you say really insightful. You know, what can you say? It's very clear. If there's any burning questions, shout up. We have got time at the end actually as well. We're going to have 5 minutes, so if you want to go and grab yourself a coffee, and then we'll come back. Don't miss Lynn speaking. I don't think Lynn will be saying that this is the thing that she loves doing the most, but you'll be hooked with what she's saying. So we've got Lynn and Johnny after the break, both of whom I think are really worth listening to. So thanks to Rachel, but Rachel and I are around at the end to answer any questions. And I'd just say, you know, what Policy in Practice are doing, what VRS are doing, we are creating momentum between us, and we are achieving things, and with those combined efforts, I hope the world will be a better place. All right, thanks a lot. We'll take 5 minutes and come back.
Thank you.